Bellard have disappeared after defrauding friends and employees of £5 million. The police have no idea where they are. Psychic Bob Cracknell is convinced the two men are hiding on the west coast of Scotland, but no one believes him, so he must get the proof himself. Bob decides to go to the west coast of Scotland to try to find some evidence for what his psychic impressions are telling him.
That I had this absolute conviction of the connection with the church, and I began to think in terms of a church as a retreat. I thought, okay, it's on an island or somewhere like that.
He makes Ullapool his base. From here, he plans to search the islands off the coast. He immediately sets about questioning the hotel staff. A couple of people seem to recognize the faces, but aren't certain. Bob then sets out to search the islands, showing the photographs to everyone he meets.
One of the ferrymen, I mean, he was quite genuine. And he said, oh, yes, I've seen this guy before, yeah. Quite genuine, you know, which gave me excitement. So I'm beginning to feel that I'm on the track.
Bob's psychic abilities have got him on the trail of the con men. Will they lead him to their hiding place? But once out at sea, Bob's hopes take a dive. There are over 40 islands off the coast at Ullapool. Finding anyone out there who doesn't want to be found could take years.
With all these islands around you, where do you begin? I can well understand the reticence of the police. I mean, can you imagine? They're listening to a guy who's been labelled a crank saying, an island off Ullapool. Yes, sir, we'll send a man out straight away. It's incredible.
All Bob's psychic feelings about the men's disappearance have had a strong connection to a church or a monastery. So once back on the mainland, Bob decides to explore this link. But the nearest monastery is over 100 miles away at Fort William.
There was two people hitchhiking along the road. So I stopped and gave them a lift, a young couple. They were heading for Glasgow. Something caused me to, for some unknown reason, take the photographs out and say, look, have you ever seen these two guys? And to my absolute amazement, the girl said, oh, yes. Recognize them both. Oh, do you remember where you saw them? Yes. At the Royal Hotel in Ullapool. That was it. I was convinced that that was the place. I was right.
The witnesses give Bob the evidence he needs. It seems his psychic powers are right after all. The con men are in Ullapool, exactly where he said they were. But is this enough for the police to catch them? With renewed confidence, Bob returns to London with the names and addresses of his witnesses. He's sure the police can now catch the con men, and the Daily Express can print the story. But Bob's in for an unpleasant surprise. Back in London, Norman Luck and the Daily Express are not impressed.
That wasn't sufficient proof. You can't say, I think. You've got to either produce a body and say they are staying at so-and-so, so-and-so guest house. We have found the Southern Organ Foresters. But that didn't happen.
After all his hard work, Bob hits a dead end. No one wants to listen. The con men will get away with it, and their victims will lose everything. His dream of a career fighting crime is fading fast.
I knew that I was right. It became a personal thing, you know. I really didn't know what to do. I'd gone out on this limb, whereas a psychic takes in all forms of vibrations, adverse and otherwise. When a psychic gets depressed, believe me, it's it's doubly worse.
And then, as the case begins to go cold, Bob receives a final psychic clue about the conmen's whereabouts.
I had a dream in which these two guys were living in a cave. In a desolate area, you know, definitely living in a cave. It was such a vivid dream. There was no question of doubt about it. I woke up convinced, as a result, that they had been living in a cave. Well, this is a bothy. As near to a cave as you can possibly imagine.
But the west of Scotland is peppered with these stone huts. How is the psychic going to convince anyone to search them all? Bob phones Norman, but the journalist is away. In desperation, he tells Detective Fickweiler about his dream. But Fickweiler's response to the idea that someone with £5 million would be living in a stone hut is less than enthusiastic.
We deal in facts. And if someone says, I think, I believe, I know things, well, then you ask them what they know. And if they can't come up with anything, why should one waste time pursuing it? Yeah, cynical, sceptical. Yeah, most coppers are. You deal in facts, and that's it.
The police are a funny breed. Unless it's written down or unless they can see it with their own eyes, they don't believe it.
It's now nearly a year since the con men have disappeared. Have they vanished into thin air? The police have exhausted all their avenues of investigation. Yet they still won't listen to a psychic. It'll take a lot more than a dream to convince them that Bob isn't a crank. And then a stroke of luck. Bob's persistence is vindicated. Jeff Green feels let down by his friends and employers, and the pressure from the finance companies demanding repayment has become too much to bear.
I trusted these guys. I thought, they'll be okay, they're going to come back. I know where they are, they're going to come back, they're going to put it all right, and so on. Then, of course, 2, 3 months, 4 months, getting into the 5th month, and nothing's happening. All these writs are flying. Your health goes down, your marriage breaks up. You're going to lose your house. And this makes you think about it all in a different way.
Green's account of Miller and Bellard's disappearance is extraordinary.
After landing in France, they made their way back on the ferry to Dover, where Jeff Green picked them up, drove them all the way up to the west coast of Scotland. From Ullapool, they set sail in 2 dinghies to an island called Priest Island.
Here was the church connection Bob had tried so hard to find. The 2 men were living in a stone hut on Priest Island, 4 miles off Ullapool. The psychic's powers were absolutely on target.
There's me chasing my backside on islands, connection with the church. Ullapool was the location. I was there. The living in the cave was correct. I believe Norman's headline story was living in a cave, eating cockle soup. But now I would have, I would have gone and got an ordnance map of the whole area and checked it out. And Priest Island would have stuck out like a sore thumb, would it not?
It took us hours to get there, and when we got there, we were thrown up against some rocks because we couldn't control the boat. The seas were too rough. In the end, we were thrown into a small cove.
Green returned home, and the 2 con men, in their 50s, set up camp in the roofless stone hut. They stayed there for nearly 8 months throughout a sub-zero winter, perhaps to make amends for the chaos and misery they'd unleashed. The 2 spiritual swindlers simply turned their backs on the world.
They left everybody, and when you leave somebody that trusts you and has great faith in you and wants to still keep you in their lives, it's a terrible thing.
Why should he cover up for these people when he was one of their victims?
When Miller and Bellard ran out of money and provisions, they returned to the mainland and moved into a caravan. They phoned Jeff Green to send them more money. Their lack of contact before that and the fact that he and others had suffered so much in their absence incensed Green. He gave them up. At their trial, both men plead guilty. With no previous offenses, they are given 6 years each. The bishop's wife is still alive, so his name is never mentioned, and the millions, they say, were all spent repaying loans and enjoying a brief taste of the high life.
None of the money was recovered. There was no indication in the books and records as to where all the money had gone.
It seems Bob Cracknell's visions had been right from the start. The con men had returned to Britain from France and hidden on an island off the west coast of Scotland. Priest Island, due to its name, did have a connection with the church, and the two men had been living in a primitive stone dwelling, not entirely unlike a cave, and perhaps the pressure, psychic and otherwise, which Bob put on Jeff Green might even have encouraged his confession.
I think that possibly Green said, this guy's not going to let go. I can't take it.
This case changed Bob's life. He became known as the psychic detective and spent the next 30 years fighting crime.
Basically, you are aware of atmosphere, feelings, vibrations that the average person is not aware of. Like a radio, if you like, on shortwave. With all the crackling and noise going along, you've got to go along and tune it in and bang, you're on the station.